Alright guys, so today we're going to be playing Gears of War 4 in 2025. Previously we covered Gears of War 1, the regular game and the Ultimate Edition, Gears of War 2, Gears of War 3, and Gears of War Judgment, which sadly is very dead and you can't find any matches online anymore in 2025. But the first three games still have fairly active player bases, which is great. And Gears of War 4 also is very active in 2025. It's definitely not nearly as active as Gears 5, obviously, because that game is more recent. You're going to have a lot more players. You're going to have a much easier time finding games in Gears 5 than Gears 4. But with Gears of War 4, you can play Team Deathmatch and King of the Hill with relative ease. It obviously depends on what time of the day that you decide to play. If you're going at like 3 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, yeah, maybe you're not going to be able to find a game. But if you play during the late afternoon, evening hours when most people are online, especially on weekends, then you'll be able to get into matches with no issue, at least if you live in North America. In Europe, it's a little bit more difficult, and in other regions of the world, it's probably not going to happen. You're probably not going to be able to find any matches for Gears of War 4. Sadly, that's just the way it is that if you're playing outside of Europe and North America, the other regions, when you're playing a really old title, it's quite difficult to get into games because this player base is so much smaller. And I should mention that it doesn't really matter which version you have between Xbox and PC, because despite the Ultimate Edition, Gears of War 1, having no crossplay between PC and Xbox, Gears of War 4 actually does have crossplay. So if you're on PC and your friend's on Xbox or whatever, like, it doesn't matter. You guys can play with each other, and the communities are together and not separated. So that also helps keeping the game alive in 2025, and it doesn't matter which version you play as a result, because typically with a lot of multi-platform games, PC version usually has the least amount of players, and I have to end up not recommending people buy it, especially with Call of Duty, you know, like the old games in that series. But yeah, at least with Gears of War 4, that's not an issue. So that's great. Regular multiplayer, campaign, and Horde mode all have full cross-play support. But yeah, Gears of War 4 is a game that I think had fairly good reception. I think that it's definitely better than Gears of War Judgment in terms of the overall player base and how they felt about it, especially when we're talking about multiplayer. People hated the multiplayer for Gears of War Judgment, and with the single player, they can kind of take it or leave it. It was okay at best. It wasn't bad, or it wasn't fantastic. It's kind of like in between. Gears of War 4, people generally enjoyed the single-player campaign, but you could kind of tell that they were taking a little bit of a different direction, narratively speaking, and just the overall tone of the game after the Coalition took over and Epic Games left the Gears of War series and were no longer working on it. You can tell. I mean, kind of like 343 taking over Halo, but much less disastrous, I think that's safe to say. Like, if you compare Gears of War 4 to Halo 4, I think it's easy which game turned out better and was more positively looked at by the community. While Halo faced a lot of accusations being a ripoff or taking a lot of inspiration from Call of Duty and being less like the original games in the series, Gears of War 4 still feels like a Gears title at heart. It definitely has a little bit of a different feel. The gameplay doesn't feel exactly like the old games. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It does still feel at its core, though, like a Gears game, and the original identity that makes that series stand apart, I think still holds up quite well in Gears of War 4. I actually think the gameplay is a lot smoother and better on Gears of War 4, which some people might disagree with, but I've noticed the gunplay and the hit detection especially feels a lot more responsive and smoother compared to the older titles on 360. But yeah, I still suck a lot of ass at Gears of War. The gameplay has been brutal in this gameplay and all the other gameplays because I'm pretty much a newcomer to the series and I'm experiencing it for the first time. So the people who do still play these older games, they know what they're doing and I don't. And that's obviously the results are going to show. So I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on Gears of War, just giving you guys a little bit of a layout on what to expect in terms of finding matches and all that essential stuff when it comes to whether or not an older game is worth playing. I mean, the single-player campaign is obviously going to be timeless no matter what, but with online, yeah, it's still pretty good. And despite being almost a decade old, you still have a pretty strong community, and it's pretty easy for me to recommend if you're a Gears of War fan.